They called her the Russian Rapunzel, a girl with storybook beauty and hair that touched her knees. At 20, she wasn't just walking the runways of Paris and New York. She was the face of Nina Ricci, the girl British Vogue hailed as a face to be excited about. But behind the perfect photos was a story no one saw coming. A story that would end in heartbreak and unanswered questions. What really happened to Ruslana Korshunova? And why does her story still haunt the fashion world? Was it the crushing weight of the industry? A love affair gone wrong? A secretive self-help group that promised transformation but left scars? Or something even darker? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the rise and sudden fall of a model the world thought had it all. To understand her story, we need to go back to the very beginning of her extraordinary life. Before she became the Russian Rapunzel, Ruslana Korshunova was a bright, ambitious girl growing up in Almaty, Kazakhstan, a place worlds away from the glossy pages of Vogue. Born on July 2nd, 1987, she was the youngest child in a family that valued education and hard work. Her father, Sergei, served in the Red Army but died when Ruslana was only 6, leaving her mother, Valentina, to raise Ruslana and her siblings alone. Friends say Valentina was devoted and practical, and Ruslana inherited that quiet strength, even as her life would take an unimaginable turn. In school, she stood out not just for her looks, but for her intellect. She spoke Kazakh, Russian, English, and German, a rare skill set that hinted at a future far from home. Her dream wasn't modeling, it was studying in Germany. She was artistic, sensitive, and deeply curious about the world. In her free time, she learned piano, took voice lessons, and, according to friends, wrote poems that revealed both a romantic soul and a sharp mind. The modeling dream? That came almost by accident. In 2003, when Ruslana was 15, the head of her school's German club, where she spent countless afternoons, asked her to pose for a local magazine called All Asia. She agreed, maybe thinking it would be a fun memory, nothing more, but those photos would change her life. Shot in Almaty's botanical gardens, the images were striking. A teenager with waist-length chestnut hair, wide-set almond eyes, and the kind of delicate storybook features you couldn't forget. She was like clay. You could do anything with her. Photographer Boris Brühl later said. There was a spark in her eyes, an innocence, and something else. An undeniable presence that even a simple camera lens couldn't hide. Those images ended up in an in-flight magazine. On a flight from Almaty to Moscow, model scout Tatiana Cherednikova flipped through the magazine, stopped at Ruslana's picture, and knew instantly. This girl could be a star. Tatiana had scouted countless faces, but Ruslana felt different, almost otherworldly. She tracked down the family, but Valentina wasn't convinced. Modeling, in her eyes, was risky and unstable. Ruslana was still just a child. She quoted an old proverb, "A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush." Why risk education for a gamble? But Ruslana had her own ideas and asked her mom to just give it a try. Eventually, Valentina relented. On one condition, she would accompany Ruslana on her first trip. By 2004, Ruslana was in London, signed to Models One. Debbie Jones, a senior booker, recalled seeing her photo and thinking she looked like something out of a fairy tale. That phrase would follow Ruslana throughout her short life. With her feline features, glistening green eyes, and hair that flowed like liquid gold, she became the girl everyone wanted in front of their camera. Her story was the fantasy so many dreamed of, from a high school classroom in Kazakhstan to the front rows of fashion's elite. But fairy tales have shadows. And Ruslana's was just beginning to creep in. That shadow didn't fall overnight. It crept in slowly, even as Ruslana's star burned brighter than ever. Within months, she was no longer the shy girl from Almaty. She was the industry's newest obsession. By 2005, British Vogue had already singled her out as a face to be excited about. For any model, that kind of mention is gold. For Ruslana, it was the start of a career that seemed unstoppable. Within 2 years, her resume read like a dream. She walked for Christian Dior, Vera Wang, Kenzo, and fronted major campaigns for DKNY and Nina Ricci, a fragrance ad that would cement her image in the public eye. In that campaign, Ruslana appeared ethereal. Pale skin, luminous green eyes, hair cascading like molten gold as she held a crystal apple. It didn't just sell perfume. It sold a fantasy, the dream of effortless beauty. Print loved her just as much as the runway. She appeared on the covers of French Elle, Russian Vogue, and in 2006, one of her most haunting editorials, Vogue Italia's Broken Dolls cover. A stark, almost prophetic shoot that critics now revisit with unease. And then there was the nickname. The press called her the Russian Rapunzel, a nod to her knee-length hair, which became both her trademark and her prison. At first, it was flattering, a fairy tale moniker for a fairy tale face. But in fashion, what makes you stand out can also keep you trapped. Reinvention is the currency of survival, and Ruslana's brand was rooted in one thing: innocence. The moment she stepped outside that frame, the illusion cracked. It's important to remember the era she dominated. The mid-2000s were obsessed with a very specific ideal: waif-like frames, porcelain skin, and an almost alien delicacy. Casting directors wanted otherworldly beauty, and agencies scoured Eastern Europe for it. Ruslana wasn't just part of that wave. She was its perfect embodiment, but value in fashion is conditional. One season, you're the darling of designers. The next, you're a forgotten face. For Ruslana, the pace was brutal. Weeks blurred into months of travel: London, Paris, New York, back to Moscow. Former boyfriends would later describe her as always tired, always on the go, shuttling between castings, fittings, and endless shoots. From the outside, it looked flawless, but her blog entries hinted at something darker, a quiet unraveling beneath the surface. What read like poetic fragments to strangers revealed an undertone of exhaustion, heartbreak, and a growing sense that she was losing control of her own life. In an industry that demands constant reinvention, Ruslana seemed desperate to hold on to something solid, something real. Friends later said she was nothing like the hardened stereotype people imagine when they think of models. She wasn't a party girl. She was sensitive, idealistic, the kind of person who took rejection personally and heartbreak even harder. Until she moved to Paris, she had never even washed her own hair. Her mother always did it for her. That small detail speaks volumes. Behind the Vogue covers and the luxury campaigns was a young woman still tethered to home, still learning how to navigate life without the people who made her feel safe. By 2007, her portfolio was enviable: top designers, global campaigns, and magazine covers most models dream about. She was sending money home, supporting her family, and living in Manhattan's financial district. But beneath the success, something was changing. Fashion's obsession with novelty meant even a 20-year-old could feel obsolete. New faces were flooding in, and the bookings that once seemed guaranteed started to slow. For someone who built her sense of identity on beauty, work, and control, that uncertainty was devastating. She needed something, anything, that could restore her sense of purpose. What she found promised transformation, clarity, even salvation. Instead, it would lead her into darkness. What Ruslana found wasn't the comfort of home or a new passion for life. It was a movement, a so-called self-improvement group that promised transformation. To some, it sounded like therapy. To others, it looked like something far more dangerous. It was called Rose of the World. On the surface, it marketed itself as a path to clarity, a way to perfect yourself and live more effectively. In reality, critics and former members describe something closer to a cult, an organization rooted in aggressive psychological training, descended from controversial programs like LifeSpring in the US, which had been linked to mental breakdowns and even deaths before being banned. According to journalist Peter Pomerantsev, who investigated the group for years and later wrote a book about it, Rose of the World drew in people at their most vulnerable. Ruslana fit the pattern. By 2007, she was worn down by constant travel, a slowing career, and personal heartbreak. She had been deeply in love with a wealthy Russian businessman, a man her friends described as charismatic, handsome, and unattainable. For a time, Ruslana believed they would marry. She even brought him home to meet her mother. And then, without warning, it ended. Friends said the breakup shattered her. She couldn't understand it. One friend recalled, she wanted marriage, children, a steady home, and he promised her all of it. When he walked away, he didn't just break her heart. He broke the sense of stability she had been clinging to. Her blog entries grew darker, fragments about love dying too soon, about castles of pink dreams collapsing into rubble. One haunting post read, "It feels as if someone tore out my heart and trod all over it." It was during this period of emotional freefall that Ruslana became involved with Rose of the World. What began as a 3-day training in Moscow turned into a consuming routine. Sessions cost more than $300 a day, a steep price, even for someone in Ruslana's position. The promise was self-mastery. The reality, according to Pomerantsev, was something closer to humiliation disguised as healing. Members were instructed to confess their deepest traumas in front of a crowd. They were told their failures were their own fault, that they were not victims, but weak. In one session, as lights blazed and music pounded, the group chanted in unison, breaking down the defenses of whoever stood on stage. "That's normal," one senior member told Pomerantsev when asked about the breakdowns. "We call it a rollback. You have to go through that to grow." Ruslana returned from these trainings changed. Friends noticed a sharper edge to her mood. She swore more, lashed out more easily, and seemed increasingly agitated with herself. She started blaming herself for everything, one acquaintance told reporters. If a shoot went badly, she spiraled. If a relationship faltered, she believed it was her fault, and yet she kept going back. Perhaps because, like many before her, she believed the process could fix what felt broken. She even tried to recruit friends, who refused. When they didn't join, the pressure on Ruslana to bring in new members reportedly mounted. In these groups, failure is not an option, and for someone already struggling with rejection, that pressure could be crushing. Meanwhile, there were other shadows in the background, rumors that would only surface years later. Court documents unsealed in 2024 placed Ruslana on Jeffrey Epstein's flight logs in June 2006, when she was just 18. She reportedly flew on his private jet, along with his assistant, chef, and bodyguard. What happened after the plane landed remains unclear. There's no proof of misconduct involving Ruslana specifically, but the connection is disturbing in hindsight. Another reminder of the predatory forces circling the industry she worked in. By early 2008, Ruslana was living in New York's financial district, in a sleek apartment worlds away from Almaty. But those closest to her sensed the glamour was just a facade. Her career had slowed. A new wave of models, tanned, athletic, and overtly sensual, was replacing the delicate, doll-like look that made her famous. At only 20, she felt her time slipping away. And then there was the isolation. Her family was thousands of miles away. Her romantic life was in ruins. She'd burned through money on courses that promised enlightenment, but left her feeling even more fractured. The most important thing about her, her so-called life coach later admitted, was that she was lonely. There was no one who was really dear to her, except for her mother. Still, Ruslana kept moving forward, or at least that's how it looked. She was booking campaigns, walking into studios, keeping up appearances. 3 days before her 21st birthday, she wrapped a shoot for Neiman Marcus in New York. She was due to fly to Texas for another job. On the evening of June 27th, She watched the film Ghost with an ex-boyfriend, read poetry, and spoke about plans for the weekend. It sounded ordinary, comforting even. But the following day would shatter any illusion of normalcy. The timeline of her final hours still raises more questions than answers. The next day was supposed to be simple. A few errands, maybe a call home, then a flight to Texas for the second leg of her Neiman Marcus shoot. Her birthday was just 3 days away, but June 28, 2008, would become the day Ruslana's story stopped making sense. That Saturday, the financial district was still, the kind of quiet Manhattan only gets on a hot summer weekend. Outside her Water Street apartment, construction crews moved behind orange safety netting. Inside, Ruslana was alone. At 2:30 in the afternoon, the silence broke with a sound that no one could mistake, a body hitting the pavement. She had fallen from her 9th floor balcony. Police ruled it almost immediately. No signs of struggle, no alcohol or drugs, no note. The case was labeled a suicide. But if you dig into the details, the story starts to fracture. Ruslana was terrified of heights. Her ex-boyfriend told the press she wouldn't even stand near a balcony railing, much less lean over one. More unsettling was her appearance. The Rapunzel hair that had defined her career, that had made her millions and earned her a nickname, was gone, cut short and uneven, as if hacked off in haste. Inside her apartment, investigators found no chaos, no signs of a woman in crisis. Fresh linens were folded on the bed. Books sat stacked neatly on the floor. A plane ticket to Texas lay ready for her next assignment. This wasn't the frozen tableau of despair that suicide scenes typically reveal. It looked like a life still moving forward. And yet, in the weeks leading up to that day, Ruslana's life was fraying in ways few could see. Her blog posts were fragments of something darker, grief dressed as poetry. It hurts as if someone took a part of me, mercilessly tore it out, stomped all over it. Another read simply, "I'm so lost. Will I ever find myself?" Behind those words was a storm she rarely spoke aloud. The pressure of an industry that crowns you one season and discards you the next. A breakup that shattered her trust and the grip of Rose of the world. The so-called training program that promised empowerment, but thrived on control. Former members described its methods as brutal, public humiliation, emotional domination, relentless demands to recruit others. Friends say Ruslana was deeply affected, more withdrawn, more self-critical, and increasingly isolated. And she wasn't the only one. Less than a year later, another model tied to the same program, Anastasia Drozdova, would die in eerily similar circumstances. 2 women, 1 circle, and a trail of questions that no one has fully answered. Officially, the case was ruled a suicide. But her family refused to believe it was that simple. In an interview, her mother said, she insisted the evidence didn't add up. No security footage from a financial district high-rise in broad daylight. No eyewitnesses. And according to her, a Ukrainian forensic expert reviewed the injuries and concluded they could have come from a car impact, not a fall.
Не нашлось ни одной камеры, которая бы могла зафиксировать. Это был день, нет ни одного свидетеля, который бы что-то видел и мог бы прояснить ситуацию. Вообще. Для чего это делается? Как будто бы сознательно кто-то убирает все свидетельства, что ли.
Was it despair? Was it something else entirely? With every answer came more questions. Questions that still haunt the people who knew her best. News of Ruslana's death spread fast. And so did the speculation. Headlines painted her as another tragic figure in a world obsessed with beauty and youth. But the truth was far messier, tangled in a web of unanswered questions and contradictions. Friends and family pushed back. They remembered a young woman making plans to keep working, to study, to build something outside of the catwalk. She had money in the bank and, despite moments of loneliness, people who believed she had a future. But the world didn't want nuance. It wanted a cautionary tale. What makes Ruslana's case even more haunting is how easily it was buried. Police closed it quickly. The press moved on. And yet, 15 years later, her face still lingers in fashion's archives, on the cover of Russian Vogue, in that Nina Ricci ad that once promised a fantasy. She became immortal in the way fashion makes women immortal, by freezing them in time, perfect and silent. But perfection is a dangerous illusion. It hides the cost, the control, the silence that defines so much of this industry. And that's why Ruslana's story still matters, not because it was shocking, but because it wasn't. Behind every flawless campaign is a person navigating an impossible standard, in an environment that too often confuses value with youth, obedience, and fragility. And maybe that's the hardest truth to face, that behind the illusion of beauty, the cost was always higher than anyone wanted to admit. 15 years later, one question still lingers. What really happened to Ruslana Korshunova? And what does it say about the industry that shaped her, celebrated her, and then forgot her?